Hey guys, this is John. Tally ho pip pip from London once again. I'm over here playing the FIDE Open at the London Chess Classic, and this is round 6. So heading into this round, I had 4 out of 5 points, having drawn my last 2 games against an IM and a GM respectively. And here I'm playing a talented young Italian Grandmaster, Francesco Rambaldi. And he has a FIDE rating of 2560. He's really made a lot of progress in the past year, I've noticed. And I got to see him play at the last tournament I played in Dallas. He happened to be there as well. So, interesting player and a guy who plays a little bit of everything in the opening. He was tough to prepare for because he almost seemingly chooses openings at random and plays them well, too. So he has a wide opening repertoire, even with the white pieces. So, wasn't sure quite what to expect, but he opened with d4. Somehow I was expecting e4 a bit more, but he opened with d4, as has been the case in all of my games here in London so far. I played d5. He played c4. And I played the Slav, c6. He played knight f3. I played knight f6. And here he played e3. So this invites the slow Slav, where white reliably defends the pawn on c4. That pawn is now protected by the bishop. So in playing this, white basically rules out the Slav proper, which, to remind you, is knight c3, d takes c4. There's a decent section of white players who do not like to face that opening, and e3 is one of the best options at white's disposal to defend that pawn. The downside of e3 is that you block in your dark square bishop, and also you allow black to develop their light square bishop outside of the pawn chain if they want. So bishop f5 is what I played. He played knight c3, and I played e6. So you have to be careful about the move bishop f5. If you're a Slav or semi-Slav player, you have to know when to time this properly. Here it works for black because if white were to play, let's say, c takes d5, c takes d5, and queen b3, white's queen is eyeing both d5 and b7, and especially we want to keep in mind b7 because black's bishop is no longer defending it. But it's easy for black to deal with this. They can just play, for instance, queen c7, and d5 is also protected by the knight. So while queen b3 could be dangerous, black has a remedy in this queen c7 move, and theory says black is fine here. However, if there was a little more pressure on d5, like say white's knight was on c3 and this knight was back on g1, then queen b3 could be more of a threat, although even there's some theory. But long story short, be wary of when you play bishop f5. If there's not a lot of pressure on d5, black can get away with this move. So moving forward again, knight c3, e6. And here there's basically only one critical move, and it's the move that Rambaldi played. It's knight h4. This is a funny looking move if you're not aware of this line, and it does violate the principle in the opening that says you shouldn't move the same piece twice. But what white's trying to do is just grab the bishop pair. He's got his sights set on that light square bishop. He wants to snag that bishop pair and point to that as a long-term advantage. So here I played bishop e4. I think this was a good choice, bishop to e4, because in most of my previous games I've played bishop g6, and even on my channel I've expressed a preference for bishop g6. But that's not to say that bishop e4 isn't any less valid. There is also bishop g4, by the way, but bishop g4 is considered the weakest of the 3 moves. So I think if you play this position as black, it makes sense to have both bishop e4 and bishop to g6 in your repertoire. You can kind of mix and match depending upon who your opponent is and what type of game you want. Black should not let the bishop just be captured on f5. They would have to damage their pawn structure in doing that, so moving the bishop is best. The difference between these 2 moves is that with bishop e4, you're actually encouraging white to play pawn f3, and then you'll come back to g6. And that is what Rambaldi did. He played pawn f3, and I came back here. And this subtlety changes the course of the game a little bit, because now white has greater central influence slightly, and in some cases they can even get in pawn to e4 quicker in like a middle game. But they've also weakened their king a bit, and having these pawns here and having the f-pawn already moved does make white's king a little shakier. So I was hoping that this was like a slight surprise for him, and from here on out he seemed a little uncomfortable with the opening. I got the sense that he wasn't expecting this line. I should also mention that if white takes on e4, knight takes e4, Then black can respond with d takes e4. And this is known to be good for black because black has the threat of g5. White's knight is trapped on the side of the board if nothing else changes. So white would have to perform a little surgery to ensure that that knight just doesn't perish on the side of the board there. So f3, bishop g6. Here Rambaldi played the main move, queen b3, attacking the pawn on b7. Here black can play queen c7 or queen b6. I played queen c7, defending the pawn. He played bishop d2, and I played bishop e7. So now that bishop e7 has been played, white typically does take this bishop with knight takes g6. If the bishop is not here, then white may try to hold off on this exchange. But let's say white were just to play some developing move instead, like bishop to e2. Black might think about playing knight e4. And this bishop on e7 performs a useful function in attacking that knight. Discovery. So hence, when bishop e7 is played, white almost always takes on g6. So we get this exchange of the knight for the light square bishop. So knight takes g6 and h takes g6. If you watch my channel regularly, you'll know that I get in these pawn structures often, where we've parted with the bishop pair as black, but we have a bunch of pawns on the same color as that departed bishop. So that makes up for the fact that we no longer have a light square bishop. We're creating like a light square pawn chain to try to compensate for that. And now the battle will typically revolve around white's bishop pair plus space advantage versus black's compact position and counterattacking possibilities. So after h takes g6, Rambaldi castled queenside. These moves are all standard. He was spending a little more time than me, though, up till this point. And here I took on c4. Again, one of the main moves. Black wants to release the tension at some point because, especially now that he's castled queenside, I would like to start throwing my queenside pawns at him. But to do that, I will probably have to eliminate that pawn on c4 because, you know, for instance, I'd love to play b5, but playing it now is not going to cut it. That would just lose a pawn. So d takes c4, while this does allow the bishop to come out to c4 in one go, may give me a chance to play b5 next with tempo and activate my pawn chain over there. So here, Rambaldi makes his first error. And again, I think it's because he just wasn't totally familiar with what's going on here. He played queen takes c4. So declining to bring his bishop out, and instead taking with the queen. And to understand why he played this, or why I think he played this, let's move back a moment, because you might be wondering, what about this pawn on h2? Isn't that pawn down on h2 hanging because black has both the rook and the queen attacking it? And you might have even looked at rook takes h2, rook takes h2, queen takes h2, and unfortunately for black this fails because of queen takes b7, hitting the rook in the corner. So that's all well and good. Like, Rambaldi is well aware that I can't take the pawn right here. But I think after d takes c4, he was worried that if he took with the bishop, and I played b5, and he retreats this bishop, because now I don't have a pawn on b7, I may just go take this pawn on h2. I don't want to, like, speak for him or try to speculate too much what was running through his head, but the fact that he played queen takes c4 and did not want to allow this to happen made me think that he was worried about losing that pawn. And mind you, this has been played before, but it's known to give white a really nice initiative. It's even possible for white to play something as simple as e4 here. And even the engine agrees that white has great compensation for the pawn. I would not have gone for this. Usually what happens after b5 and the light square bishop moves is black will play a6 and look to get in c5 and not bother with that pawn on h2. But it's natural, I mean, especially if you haven't played this line before. Looking in the database, I didn't see him play this variation, so I have a feeling he was just kind of playing this position on sight. So hence he takes with the queen. Now, you notice I gave this move a dubious symbol, because bishop takes c4 is definitely stronger, but why is queen takes c4 addressing the threat of rook takes h2? If you'd like to try to figure that out, you can pause your video. So why is rook takes h2 not working for black now? All right, so the reasoning is that if rook takes h2, white has knight b5, hitting my queen on c7. And because of the c-file pin, I cannot take the knight. I would just lose my queen. And there's only one square I can go to on this diagonal where the queen will still be defending the rook on h2, and that's g3. But after queen g3, white can play bishop e1, and I'm out of luck. I'm going to be losing material here. So queen takes c4 is tactically justified in defending the pawn on h2, but it's clumsier, and white's really going to regret not having moved this bishop. So here I played a6. This is a common idea for black. After you take on c4, you play a6 to prepare the b5 pawn push. Rambaldi played queen b3. I went b5. And here you played g3. So again, kind of showing deference to the rook takes h2 threat, which, I may or may not have played. Like, had he played something like bishop d3, I don't know if I would have played that. Even though white has played this little suboptimally, I probably would not have speculated on taking this pawn. I probably would have just gone for c5. But after b5, he did play g3, so stopping rook takes h2 once and for all. Unfortunately for white, this gives black really easy play. And already right around here, I was already thinking I had equalized, and maybe I was getting some advantage too. So I played c5. This is a nice pawn break to get in. So attacking the pawn on d4, possibly thinking about advancing further, if allowed. And I'm making some headway against white's king on c1. White's king is not feeling comfortable in the line of fire with some exchanges being made, some of these pawns coming off the board. So white took the pawn on c5. And here I've got a few options. I played knight bd7, so looking to recapture the pawn with a knight. White can't do anything to rescue this pawn, so black does have the luxury of being able to wait a move before capturing it. I did think briefly about playing queen takes c5. This is tempting because I would be threatening b4, but I thought that white would just sidestep that with king b1, and I can win a pawn here. You may have picked up on that fact that I can go after a pawn with queen f5 check, but I'm just not sure that this is the right thing to do. Like, let's say king a1, queen takes here, and I have a feeling white's going to have some nice compensation. Maybe even just something like bishop e2. Black's gone to great lengths just for the win of a single pawn, and maybe white will even try to get the bishop on this diagonal very soon. So queen takes c5 was possible, and maybe after king b1, black could just do something like knight c6 and not even worry about queen f5. But I've played games in this line before where after white takes on c5, it's black's best bet simply to develop with the knight and try to capture with that piece, as I was describing, so that's what I went with here. And white played king b1, so hiding the king. I took on c5 with tempo. Rambaldi brought the queen back to c2. I castled short. And here you played e4. Again, I was feeling pretty confident already. I figured my position was at least equal and probably better, because white is just kind of lagging in development. He hasn't got his light square bishop out yet, whereas I have completely coordinated my position, and I've also made some strides on the queen side. So it sort of feels like white is a move or two behind where they should be. So after e4, I played rook ac8. And the nice thing for black is a lot of my moves are pretty easy. Rook ac8 I think makes perfect sense because this is a open file. We already have some pressure down that file with the queen, and we're introducing the idea of knight a4. I thought a bit about rook fc8. This illustrates one of the classic dilemmas in a chess game, which is which rook to use on an open file. And I don't think there's a perfect answer here. I do think rook ac8 is maybe slightly better. My thinking was that with rook fc8, I may keep this rook on the queen side where it could be used in the assault against white's king. But I also liked rook ac8 because I thought that in some cases rook fd8 would be good, especially if white's queen were to try to flee to the d file. Like, say, rook c1, queen b7, queen b7, queen d1. Let's say white tries to kind of get out of the limelight, out of the attack from the rook on the c file. Maybe it's nice that I can play rook fd8 here and track the queen even further. These are the type of decisions that you shouldn't spend too much time on, I've found. If you look at a position and after a couple minutes you can't really tell like which rook is best on a certain square, you're probably not going to figure it out if you spend 5 or 10 minutes. You kind of just have to make a judgment call and go with it. So rook a c8, and black's threats are building. I mean, knight a4 is looming on the horizon. And again, I think white's just a little behind where they want to be. So here, white played bishop e3. Not sure this move helps him too much, but already it's pretty tough, I gotta say. After bishop e3, I have full license to go on the attack now, so I played knight a4, exactly the move I wanted to play. White's knight clearly cannot take on a4 because he would lose his queen on c2. Meanwhile, I'm just threatening to take and win a pawn. Also, b4 could be a threat a lot of times. So white played rook c1. He realizes that he needs to reinforce this knight. I played queen b7. Note that I can't play b4 right away here because he could take on a4 with the queen. And I would regain the piece, but he has rook takes c3, and white would be up a pawn. So I do want to take a moment to play queen b7 and get out of the way of the file. Generally, when you have two major pieces attacking down a file, especially a rook and a queen, since those are distinct major pieces, it's better to have the rook attacking first, and if possible, have the queen backing it up. So really, I'd like these two pieces switched around if I can, because you don't want to lead with your most valuable piece a lot of times, especially if there's going to be some exchanges going down. So queen b7, I'm just getting out of the way and letting the rook do the dirty work, basically. And I also have in mind taking and maybe even using my queen on the b file now to support a b4 pawn push. And here, white made a mistake. Again, I think the position is not easy for him already. I don't envy his choices right here. I thought he should maybe just develop this bishop, like say something like bishop e2. This would allow me to simply take, and then white would have to take with a pawn, and white would have some structural defects over here. But I think it's mandatory for white to get coordinated, and they're going to have to accept something like this if they want to survive. Rambaldi tried to move the queen over and induce a few more exchanges, but in doing so, he ends up with a weak structure anyways, and he's not helping his development cause either. So, and you'll see it in a few moves why queen g2 was played. Actually, I think I can tell you right now. If he moves the queen somewhere else, like say queen d2, what do you think black could do? I'll pose this to you as a puzzle. How should black react to a move like queen to d2? All right, so there's several attractive-looking moves. You could make a case for something like bishop b4, pinning the knight, or rook fd8, attacking the queen. But the crux of what Rambaldi was trying to avoid by playing queen to g2 is knight takes c3, and then let's say pawn takes. Actually, it doesn't quite work here. Never mind. You know what? This was a bad quiz question. I should have put the queen on e2. Maybe done it this way. The point is that I might have this. Knight takes e4. And after white recaptures, I can take with the queen on e4, and there's a fork here and here. So I'm going to win that rook in the corner. So my fault. I kind of posed this in an awkward way. On queen d2, probably bishop e4 or rook f8 is good. But just know that knight takes e4 is hanging in the air, and I think that was part of the reason why he played queen g2. He's trying to defend that pawn. So anyways, after queen g2, I took on c3. He took with the rook. I took. He took back. So now I was starting to think like, all right, there's probably something close to a clear win here. I know we're only 23 moves into the game, and I'm black, and I'm playing a grandmaster, but everything about this position just screams to me that white should be in huge trouble. I mean, just look at white's pieces. Like, all his pieces are on the king side, basically. And his king, his lone king, is only protected by a couple of raggedy-looking pawns. Whereas I've got my queen on the b file, I have good harmony in my camp, I've got pawn weaknesses I can play against. So I was already starting to think, like, all right, how do I land a decisive blow here? And what I decided to do is play b4, so threatening the pawn on c3. I have a clear initiative, so I don't want to slow down. Rook c8 was also a serious candidate move, but b4 looked even better. And again, if he like swings the queen over, let's say to b2, I have this knight takes e4 shot. It works the same way. So his queen can't really help out his king so much anymore. He can try, but he's going to suffer the consequences. So after b4, white played c4, trying to bypass my pawn, and I pressed ahead with b3. And here, if white tries to play, let's say a4, looking to bypass again, then my queen is coming into the position, queen b4. This pawn's a goner, and if that happens, I think white's king is really looking naked and exposed. So again, white just doesn't have a lot of good options. I mean, developing the bishop could maybe be considered, but after something like bishop d3, b takes a2 check, king takes a2, white's king is going to be open for the rest of the game. Maybe queen c6, looking to play queen a4 check. I'll probably bring my knight to d7 and maybe put my bishop on f6, where it's going to have a nice diagonal, again leading towards white's king. Black basically just has a free attack here. All you have to do is compare the relative safety of the two kings. Black's king is completely safe, whereas white's is going to be a clear target for all my pieces. This may not even be best play either. It's possible black has something else after bishop d3, but just to illustrate, I think b takes a2 is good. Instead, though, Rambaldi played queen d2, or queen to b2. And if you want to pause your video, try to figure out how I should respond to queen b2. What should black play? All right, so if you've been paying attention, you'll have no trouble with this one. It's knight takes e4, once again. So the same tactic works, because if white takes the knight, then queen takes e4 check, and we're forking the king and the rook again. We're going to go win this and win the game. That's way too much material. So I'm pretty sure Rambaldi saw that I could play knight takes e4, but maybe he just thought that he had very few options at his disposal right here. So knight takes e4, and here white took on b3 with the queen. Since he can't take the knight, he probably should take the pawn. If a takes b3, I thought that bishop f6 would be very strong, attacking the queen. And I was just loving my dark square presence here. Like after something like, let's say, queen c2, knight c3 check, king c1, queen into b4, white's king is feeling the full weight of the black army, and he's just getting killed on the dark squares, basically. When you're attacking and you're attacking successfully, usually the tactics will like fall into place. And often you hit like a certain moment where your threats reach like critical mass, and there's nothing your opponent can do about it. And that's what we're seeing here. So queen takes b3. And once again, I'll pose this to you. After queen takes b3 for white, how do you think I should reply? What do you think black's strongest option is right here? You can pause your video if you like. All right, so I think my one mistake in this game was right here, because I did not play the strongest move. I played a move that's still good, and still gives black a very nice attack, probably winning attack, but there was a move that pretty much just would have ended white's resistance immediately, and that move is knight to c3 check. Upon putting this game in the Lichess analysis module afterwards, it immediately said knight c3 check, and I don't know why I didn't consider this move in the game. Probably because I had my move in mind before I got here, and I was kind of fixated on that. But knight c3 is a really nice way to just end things. White's queen cannot take because he's pinned, so he'd have to move his king. Let's say king c2. And then black just invades on f3, takes the pawn, and hits these two pieces with tempo. And that's all over. I mean, at minimum, white's going to lose the exchange, because if rook g1, trying to save the rook, then queen takes e3, and white doesn't have time to take this knight because they're losing the rook on g1. So that was a pretty simple two-move tactic that for some reason I overlooked. But I was intent on getting my queen out of the attack. I really didn't want to trade queens here. I mean, trading queens would do white a huge favor, right? Because we're stabilizing the position for them when they're just under heavy attack. And white would love to get to an endgame here. Anything resembling an endgame would just thrill white at this point. So, of course, we're not going to trade queens. I played queen a8. I thought this was kind of a clever move at the time, and it's what I had been planning on leading up to this position. But again, knight c3 was stronger. The idea of queen a8 is that I'm still on e4, so if white takes my knight, I still can come in with check. But also, I'm threatening rook to b8. So rook to b8, skewering white's queen to their king, is now on the agenda. So I thought this was kind of a neat retreating move to the back rank where my queen is supporting both rook b8 and also the knight on e4. Here Rambaldi played bishop d3. He could try to run with his king, so something like king to c2. But black just has so many good options here. It's almost a foregone conclusion that black is either winning or close to winning. Let's say like rook b8, for instance, and then if, let's say, queen d3, white trying to run away, knight c5, attacking the queen, bishop takes c5, bishop takes c5. This is sort of similar to what happened in the game, where we get into an opposite color bishop position, but one where white is so weak on the dark squares that they're unable to defend. So he did play bishop to d3 instead. Now, this offers me an interesting choice, because with bishop d3, Rambaldi is offering to give up his queen. So I could play rook b8 right away if I wanted to. I could also throw in knight takes g3, force white to take, and then play rook b8. I think bishop here is fairly dangerous in view of something like queen takes f3 even. This bishop's pinned. I'm going off and attacking the rook. Also, I'm hitting the bishop. In the game, I was more so looking at, instead of knight takes g3, just the straightforward rook b8. But I was kind of thinking white might have some chances after bishop takes e4, rook takes b3, a takes b3. He's completed his development. He's given up his queen for a rook and bishop, but black would have a small technical task on his hands here. And often when you're attacking and you have a nice position, you face the decision whether to cash in and go for material or try to continue the attack. And this is a case where I decided not to go for the queen because the attack seemed so promising, and I was even willing to play on with equal material because I thought white's king was so weak. So hence, after bishop to d3, I played knight to c5, forking the queen and the bishop, and also threatening queen takes f3. So he took on c5. I took back. And this is a double attack because, again, I'm hitting the pawn, and I'm still threatening rook b8. So we still have aspirations to play rook to b8. He played bishop e4, attacking my queen. And I went queen a7. So rook b8 is still a threat. Note that white can't force a queen trade or anything because, again, this move is going to skewer the queen. So they have little option but to flee, either with their queen or their king. So Rambaldi played king to c2. Here I went rook b8, attacking the queen. Probably white should play queen to d3 here. But in that case, I was looking at a couple different things. I thought queen b6 would be a nice option, just threatening to come into b2 and drive white's king all over the place. Also, the computer points out the amusing option of bishop to g1, trying to box in this white rook on h1 and threatening queen f2. Not sure I would have played that one, but that's kind of cool as well. Instead, though, white played queen a4. And we're nearing the end of the game. Let me ask you once again, what should black do here? Try to find my most accurate continuation after queen a4. You can pause your video if you like. All right, so we know that white's king is exposed, and in particular, white is extremely weak on the dark squares. We've got our rook in position on the b file, but our queen needs to be activated. If we're going to kill white here, the queen is probably going to be delivering the decisive blows. Okay, so I was looking at moves with my bishop because I wanted to get the queen into f2. You might also consider a move like queen b6, but it is stronger to move the bishop, and I think the move that I played is best. So I played bishop to b4, getting the bishop onto a slightly more aggressive post, and threatening queen f2 check. We do block the rook on the file, but that's kind of a minor point. So Rambaldi played rook f1, developing this rook and guarding against queen f2. But unfortunately for him, queen e3 is nearly as bad, which is the move I played. The queen comes in, and I'm threatening queen e2 check. I'm also threatening queen d2, or maybe even queen c3. And this position is utterly hopeless for white, so Rambaldi resigned here. Just nothing to be done. I mean, the threat of queen e2 alone is virtually strong enough to win, but say he plays something like rook d1, I have a number of different ways I can try to checkmate him here, but let's just say queen c3 check, king b1, and then bishop a3. This will be mate in 2, because after queen b3, we take the queen, he takes back, and queen b2 is checkmate. When you're attacking with this many pieces against almost totally exposed king, it's just a matter of time, basically. White needs more defenders than they currently have. So this was really nice to get a pretty quick and effortless win against a grandmaster. I say effortless because really my position, as someone said online, it kind of played itself. If you know like some of the main ideas in this line, like this was all theory virtually up until this point, and then he played the inferior queen takes c4 move, but nothing I did is really that far from what usually happens in this line. So the idea of playing b5 and then c5, and once we get here, I didn't think many of these moves were very difficult to find. My initiative is already reaching nearly critical proportions, and he helped me out with a couple of mistakes like that queen to g2 move, but in reality, white's position is already pretty bad here. So I think this was more the case of Rambaldi playing a bad game versus me playing a really good one. It's not easy to beat grandmasters, especially with black, and yeah, I think he clearly had just an off game here. But that said, I did take advantage at key moments, and I think I played well overall. I wish I would have seen knight c3 check right here. Queen a8 is still good enough to win according to the engine, but knight c3 would have been a nice tidy way to just end his resistance right away. All right, so after this win, I am sitting on 5 out of 6 points. Good score, and I'm tied for first at the London Chess Classic FIDE Open. So round 7 will be big. Stay tuned. I'll be posting analysis on that one tomorrow. And as always, thanks for watching, guys. Really appreciate it. Talk to you guys later. Bye.